Welcome back, everyone. Prior to getting started with the second panel, I want to thank the OER team as well as the team throughout the commission that has put together the technical conference, and the AV team that is helping to live stream the conference. It's a tremendous amount of work to put one of these conferences together, and we thank them for the hard work and what is hopefully will be a long, relaxing weekend. Let's get started on the next panel, entitled CIP Reliability Standards and the Evolving Grid. I will introduce each panelist and give them an opportunity to provide opening remarks. As before, I ask each panelist to limit their remarks to no longer than 2 minutes to make this a little bit more friendly this time. I have a yellow card and a red card, and I will raise the yellow card at 2 minutes and ask you to please finish up your remarks within a few seconds, and then after which we will move on to the next panelist. Again, materials not covered in ensuing discussions can be filed in docket number AD 23-9 by way of the Commission's e-library system. After opening remarks, we'll begin with a question and answer session led by the Commission. The panelists are Manny Cancel, where's Manny? There's Manny. Senior Vice President and CEO of the EISAC, Jonathan Tubb, Director, Industrial Cybersecurity North America of Siemens Energy, Rudolph Powell, Vice President, Information and Cybersecurity Services, ISO New England, Joseph Mosher, Portfolio Manager, EDF Renewables, Jason Blake, President and CEO of CERC, Scott Aronson, Vice President, Security and Preparedness of EEI, and Maggie Powell, Security Assurance, Power and Utility Sector, Amazon Web Services. Please go ahead, Mr. Cancel.
Thank you. And thanks for having me here, and I appreciate the privilege to participate on the panel. Let me remember to put the microphone on. So I'll jump right in. As you know, the threat landscape is unprecedented, presenting challenges that are increasingly difficult to detect and protect against. The electricity sector is under constant attack by nation states and organized criminals. We see billions of attempts a day to survey our networks, identify vulnerabilities or gaps in protection, steal credentials or data, or exact a ransom. Amongst the most critical threats we face come from nation states. The 2023 Worldwide Threat Assessment, published by the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, asserts that China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea possess the ability to disrupt critical infrastructure in the United States. This point isn't subject to debate, and as I indicated, the EISAC and the electricity sector see evidence of this every day. Geopolitical tensions continue to provide the backdrop to a complex threat landscape. China poses a threat to critical infrastructure and continues to demonstrate increasing sophistication and adaptive techniques to gain access to networks and conduct espionage. And we recently witnessed this in the recent Volt Typhoon campaign, which targeted critical infrastructure here in the United States. In addition, the EISAC recently shared information regarding an attack on an Asian power utility that's been going on since February of 2023, again, further demonstrating China's capabilities. And we continue to assess with high confidence that China will continue to target critical infrastructure here in the U.S. to grow their knowledge and identify access points for future use. Russia also remains a top cyber threat as it refines and employs its espionage, influence, and attack capabilities. And the ISAC similarly continues to identify Russian link scanning in our information technology and operation technology systems, and searching for security gaps. And this is particularly important as the war in Ukraine drags on and as Moscow continues to promote disinformation and to deter additional support for Ukraine. Vulnerabilities in enterprise software platforms, continue to pose a really increasingly very tough challenge, overwhelming challenge, arguably. And these are vulnerabilities in software platforms that are used pervasively across the electricity industry. They are coming at an alarming and overwhelming pace, as I mentioned. The National Vulnerability Database, that's NVD, that is maintained by the National Institutes of Standards for Technology, is on pace to record over 27,000 vulnerabilities in 2023. Many of them are critical. That's a 25% increase from 2022. And if you do the math quickly, that is 74 vulnerabilities a day. Almost impossible to respond to.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mr. Cancel. All right, we'll move now on to Scott Aronson from EEI.
You know, Mr. Ortiz, I can't even say hello in 2 minutes, so be gentle. Hey, good morning, Chairman Phillips, Commissioners. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. My name is Scott Aronson. I serve as EEI's Senior Vice President for Security and Preparedness. EEI is the trade association representing all of the nation's investor-owned electric companies. Appreciate the opportunity to talk about the changing energy grid and what it means for security and resilience of the nation's most critical infrastructure. As has been noted throughout the morning, the grid is changing and it's growing. These changes aren't inherently good or bad. They are inevitable. They are happening because technology is evolving and because customers' expectations are changing. That said, with these changes and an environment with growing geopolitical risk, just-in-time supply chains being threatened, cyber and physical attacks targeting critical infrastructure, extreme weather becoming more frequent and more impactful, the attack surface and stakes are changing too. To address these issues, EEI and its members have embarked on an initiative called Securing the Grid of the Future. This effort recognizes that thank you so much, recognizes, good things come to people who ask. This effort recognizes that new and distributed resources can provide resilience, but only if they themselves are resilient. As we consider the changes that are coming, we must ensure that policies, regulations, investments, R&D, and engineering decisions prioritize the security, resilience, and availability of these new technologies and the ever-evolving grid. That means new grid technologies need strong cyber hygiene, secure manufacturing processes, and general resilience and reliability so that they can be depended on to enable the grid of the future. As distribution assets become more impactful to the bulk electric system, I would point you to the DOE NARUC effort to develop baselines for security of distribution assets. While the current effort is in draft form, it represents the beginning of an important conversation on how best to ensure states maintain a role as economic regulators who understand the risk profile and risk tolerance of their citizens, but also for input from federal stakeholders to ensure we are developing common baseline expectations for these new grid participants and their technologies to support national security. So we really do, as we said before, the grid is changing and it's growing. So we really do need an all of the above strategy in terms of both fuel and infrastructure to meet this growing demand and to ensure American competitiveness and security. In addition to addressing third-party risk and availability of material and equipment to grow and modernize the grid, there are other imperatives. Specifically, critical electric infrastructure information, or CEII, must be protected. We understand the importance of sharing data to support decisions by regulators and those who are helping to build this new grid, but locking down all of our systems on the front end while leaving a potential backdoor open for anyone who is granted access to sensitive information about grid operations, such as the information found in FERC Form 715, poses a challenge. So given the current cyber threat landscape, we believe it's time to reevaluate the policies and procedures that currently govern the release of CEII. With that, EEI and its members are excited to work with y'all, and I look forward to your questions.
All right.
Just under the wire.
Thank you, Mr. Aronson. Mr. Blake.
Thank you. And again, this is not my strength, compressed time. So what I would like to say is that, well, first of all, it's an honor to be here. So thank you, Chairman, thank you, Commissioners, thank you, FERC staff, and my peers on the panel here. There's no question that the threats are real, and they are unrelenting. You've heard that already. And then I think with this topic here that we're dealing with today, with IBRs, it's also interesting to see how the attack surface is expanding, right? When you think about it from a pure numbers perspective, you'll have a larger, coal plant retiring that may be 300, 800 megawatts, and obviously what's coming online, just from a sheer number perspective of devices, it's more, right? They tend to be smaller plants. From the wind and the solar. In addition to that, there's also, they're more digitized. They need additional tools to perform their functions, their performance. All good, because this is where I feel very comfortable and confident as we move into the future, is that the cybersecurity standards provide a very strong base to ensure and drive the security as these devices come online. My privilege today is to come here as boots on the ground, and kind of share with you what we're seeing out there as we are utilizing our monitoring and enforcement tools and ensuring that there is compliance with the CIP standards and what we're seeing. And within my written remarks, I have shared some common themes that we have observed that have been challenges or that we foresee could be challenges as entities continue to rapidly add, buy, sell assets and bring them online, and or newer entities that are previously not registered are connecting. And those themes are, first of all, workforce. As you can imagine, we're talking about volume of work, so we need the people. Oh, no. Workforce. Second, supply chain is something we need to be very mindful of. The third would be disassociation. And when I say that, just think security by design. Don't bolt on security. And fourth is over-reliance on vendors. So those are the themes, and I'm more than happy to talk about all of the good work we have done to help mitigate and partner with industry to address those issues, both from a standards perspective and also prospectively. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Blake. Mr. Mosher.
Good morning. I appreciate the opportunity to be here and share my thoughts with the Commission about the NERC Critical Infrastructure Protection Standards and the evolving grid. Technological advancements will continue to provide us and our companies with the option of adopting them into our everyday lives, making them easier, safer, and less expensive. As written, the current NERC CIP standards do not provide clear guidance on how applicable entities can implement new technology that varies from the memorialized reliability standards. Attempts to incorporate newer technology into the NERC CIP standards can be painful and time-consuming. Let me provide an example. Since 2016, industry and regulatory leaders have wrestled with how to include and map virtualization into NERC CIP environments. What changes can we make to allow for early adoption of newer technologies that could reduce the risks and costs associated with maintaining the grid? There are other technologies, such as cloud computing, that would provide significant cost, security, and reliability benefits that cannot be fully leveraged. The import of our agility is intensified when you also consider the new generating resources that have connected to the electric grid in the last several years. The ease and rate at which smaller generators, such as PV solar, wind, battery storage, and others, can connect to the grid has multiplied not only the number of generators, but also the vendors used to support this new infrastructure. In many cases, these new or adapting security and SCADA vendors do not fully support on-prem solutions and instead require a full or partial cloud implementation, potentially making the generator owner non-compliant with NERC CIP. This trend has increased over the past several years and will only get worse. As many companies move toward a public-facing cloud, we are left with fewer internal and external resources able to support on-prem environments. This increases the risk and length of time needed to restore systems when we do experience failure. As technology changes and improves, industry and regulatory leaders must act to allow for quicker and fuller adoption of supportive technology. This will help even the playing field when protecting the most critical infrastructure from bad actors not limited by regulatory frameworks and guidelines. The purpose of my comments is not to advocate for the adoption of a particular technology, but to emphasize the import of adopting current and future technologies that could assist the grid's secure and reliable operation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mosher. Mr. Powell.
Good morning, commissioners and staff. My name is Rudy Powell. I'm the Vice President of Information and Cybersecurity Services at ISO New England, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to the Commission today. Energy entities are high-value targets, and ISO New England has a strong focus on meeting this challenge. Using multiple intelligence sources, active training exercise, and other simulations, our cybersecurity staff is updated on current threat trends and ready to respond to an incident. But in order to be successful, cybersecurity staff must have proper visibility into applications and networks. Traditional log monitoring and malware detection is insufficient in the face of modern threats. Thus, ISO New England has augmented its traditional security tools with machine learning-enabled endpoint detection backed by world-class threat hunters, and similar tools for application performance monitoring that aids with anomaly detection. Unfortunately, these tools cannot be used for several ISO New England systems, including some of the most important ones. ISO New England has an intranet where employees can access information such as the cafeteria menu. The intranet is afforded all of the enhanced cybersecurity protections mentioned earlier. However, our energy management system for the New England grid cannot be afforded those same protections. The reason is that those protections require cloud-enabled services, which would not allow us to comply with the current CIP standards. While this comparison may be extreme, it illustrates the challenges that entities like ISO New England face when trying to maintain cybersecurity while complying with CIP. To address this issue, after working with a broad cross-section of energy entities, including some of my fellow panelists, ISO New England co-submitted a standards authorization request to NERC with the hope that the standards can be revised to allow the use of cloud-based services. Despite the broad support and a positive reception from both NERC and NPCC, the CIP revision process will take years. Our industry is currently behind in leveraging cloud technologies to improve the security and reliability of its critical assets, whether it is artificial intelligence, quantum computing, or the next disruptive technology. The industry will again be at a disadvantage unless it adapts. Without a doubt, cyber criminals will not be hindered in using advanced technology to further their aims. Therefore, the energy industry must assess the ramifications of the CIP standards on disruptive technology sooner, reduce the time spent to make revisions, or create a process for compliance exceptions within the CIP Reliability Standards. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Powell. And on to you, Ms. Powell.
Hello, Commissioners, Chairman Phillips, and staff. Thank you so much for affording me the opportunity to speak with you today. My name is Maggie Powell. I'm a Principal Industry Security Specialist at Amazon Web Services. I support security and compliance for the energy and utility sectors. I joined AWS after working for a number of years for a large investor-owned utility. Among my roles in the industry included covering NERC compliance, including participating on CIP drafting teams, so I know what it's like to sit on a team. And my most recent role, industry role, I headed up security operations for the real-time systems, so I know what it's like to be awake at night over security issues. Again, thank you for the opportunity to talk with you today. We have submitted a longer written statement in response to the questions, but in opening, I'd like to highlight some important themes about security, reliability, and compliance, and how cloud technologies can be part of the solutions. Utilities recognize that the cloud can play a pivotal role in advancing digital transformation. Those that embrace the cloud enable their mission-critical applications to operate reliably and securely in the cloud and provide greater benefits to customers. However, as already stated, the current NERC CIP standards are a barrier to cloud adoption for many CIP-regulated use cases, including those that are critical to the security of the bulk electric system. Modifications are required to allow utilities to appropriately use cloud technology. From a security perspective, the electric sector is facing increases in the number and sophistication of cyber attacks, which is driving utilities around the world to shift to technologies like cloud technology, where security can be built into everything organizations do, and to better manage the pace and volume of cyber threat information, indicators of compromise, and alerts that continue to rise in ICS environments, and to reduce or eliminate human errors. Cloud technologies are key in augmenting security teams' abilities with increased visualization, automation, and resilience. As well, the operational demands of decarbonization, decentralization, and digitalization translate to a more than 100 times increase in data volumes to reliably operating the grid, making compute capacity essential. Cloud offers opportunities to gather instructive information from this data and create value for applications such as predictive maintenance, outage management, power flow analysis, and other operational applications. Given all these changes, there is an urgency to address the NERC CIP barrier and allow entities the option to use cloud technologies and to answer some of the imminent risks to entities, such as whether entities can compliantly use cloud technology for even other revision projects like around internal network security monitoring, whether low-impact renewable generations that are currently using cloud technologies compliantly can continue to do so to fit with their growth plans, and whether entities can continue to use vendor solutions.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Powell.
Thanks very much.
Okay, moving on to you, Mr. Tubb.
Good morning. My name is Jonathan Tubb, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak to the Commission today regarding both evolving threats to the bulk electric system, as well as a means to address them through the critical infrastructure protection standards. It's been my privilege to watch the industry evolve over these last 14 years, beginning with the enforcement of CIP version 3 back in 2009, a time when the prevailing mentality that an air gap would remove all risk was widely accepted. Throughout today, where we're starting to see implementation of robust risk management frameworks, as well as tailored operational technology-focused security controls. Throughout this transition, the electric industry has witnessed an equally rapid evolution of adversarial tactics and the constant cat and mouse game that is cybersecurity. It's imperative that regulation is able to adapt to this changing threat landscape. Throughout today's conversation, I want to focus on three major areas that I believe should inform regulation. The first is the changing threat landscape, as I already mentioned. While we are concerned with nation-state actors and do appreciate the work that the ISAC is doing, from a day-to-day basis, we're finding simple threat actors achieving resounding success through relatively simple malware campaigns, ransomware campaigns. While those impacts are largely limited to business systems, we've observed instances where uncertainty around the state of OT systems following a cyber event has led to business decisions to discontinue operations. Improving visibility into operations, I think, will be key to addressing that risk. The second area that I want to touch on follows advancement of technology and operations. The lines between traditional business systems and industrial systems is beginning to blur, if not completely evaporate. The upside of this, obviously, is that organizations can operate more efficiently by taking advantage of this technology. They're able to scale systems into things like cloud technology, remote operations, asset performance solutions. However, the implementation of this technology introduces a more complex attack surface that is more likely to be susceptible to traditional IT threats. Regulation shouldn't preclude these technologies, as it will be key to scaling our more resilient grid as distributed resources become the norm. Rather, regulation should address these unique challenges those systems and platforms bring. Finally, as an industry, we should not lose sight of the basics. Understanding risk begins by understanding what you have. Collecting and maintaining an asset inventory is still a largely manual effort for control system components down at or below level 2 of the Purdue model. Configuration change management is still relegated to vendor-specific solutions. Traditional vulnerability management concepts are a significant challenge in environments where downtime cannot be tolerated, and reliability is the name of the game. So implementing effective and scalable cybersecurity program elements is still a challenge. Industry and vendors must come together to address these shared risks when it comes to maintaining our critical infrastructure. I look forward to exploring these concepts throughout the panel.
Thank you so much, Mr. Tubb, and thanks to all of our panelists for their opening remarks. We'll now go on to a question and answer session led by the Commission, starting with Commissioner Christie. Okay, very good. Commissioner Clement.
Thank you for the shakeup. I wasn't totally processed because I didn't think it was my turn yet, but I have a lot of questions. One is, okay, I know what I'm going to talk about here. Let's talk about the cloud computing barriers. The reason, can you all specify a little bit more about the reasons they can't satisfy the CIP standards? And is there any specific barrier that FERC can take on now, or is the process happening at NERC? Should we be watching that and letting it play out? Thanks.
So the biggest issue is whenever you even not to get too into the weeds, but you have no matter what type of infrastructure you're dealing with on the cyber side, there needs to be a point where you identify where electronic access is going and coming from, right? Also, same thing with physical access. And so that's the biggest piece. So if you're looking at just data, there are changes that are going into effect January of next year that will greatly reduce this burden, because you're mostly dealing with critical information. There have been restrictions preventing that going into the cloud, but when you're dealing with the continued convergence of IT and OT systems where you have cloud infrastructure that could impact the real-time operations of a site, of a generation or transmission site, that's where you have there's very specific guidelines that are drawn up in the NERC CIP standards that require you to identify that, like the electronic equipment and the physical equipment, and that's where you have the burden, because you're responsible for making sure that that infrastructure is physically and electronically secured.
In a simplified way, the CIP standard is an asset-based standard, right? So in cloud computing, you don't necessarily know for all of your systems or services, necessarily what asset it's running on from a physical point of view, and as well, in a shared responsibility model like the cloud, who is administrating those assets, which are core pieces of the CIP standards. Certainly as far as for assisting with this burden, obviously we all mentioned the SAR that we have written that had broad support, certainly helping with the priority of that. It has provisions so that it can be written in a way that some of these more urgent needs can be addressed earlier, and the larger endeavors such as running critical assets in the cloud themselves in the cloud can be in a separate phase. But certainly some assistance with the priority with that would be helpful, for sure.
Need some volume there. So to comment on the existing standards, they were written without contemplating virtualization. They were written before cloud was really a thing. And so they are very device-centric. But to call out a few things that I noted in the SAR that I think are very thoughtful, because the industry is taking action and trying to move this forward. But there's two things that are called out. First of all, to take very much a risk-based and risk assessment approach to it, to enable entities to be able to assess risks based on facts and circumstances of their operations, and also identify the most appropriate mitigations, but further to iterate on those. So that can evolve as risks change. The other aspect of it is it dives in a little deeper in looking at third-party security assurance certifications and the role that they can play in the CIP environment. And the very real importance of those is that, especially when it comes to cloud, think of programs like FedRAMP or SOC or ISO programs. Those are continuous monitoring programs. They come with their own audits, and they're conducted by cloud security experts. So you're aligning an expertise in assessing third-party technologies that then entities can recognize and focus their efforts on securing the points of their services and their operations that are really within their purview.
Thanks. And is there a set of standards around which those third-party security assistance providers operate? Is that a shared perspective?
In terms of
what they're monitoring for, how they're monitoring, what their view of how the risk allocation should be and is?
Well, there certainly is. There certainly are mappings of controls. I mean, many of them have kind of a universe of controls that are the good housekeeping of security, and any differences can be kind of mapped across the various certification programs that exist. I think that is one aspect that the drafting team will need to look at, and NERC will need to look at in determining perhaps which certifications fit their needs, and hopefully would be flexibility to fit with the entity's needs as well.
Thank you.
So my personal opinion, having sat on the NERC drafting team during the development of the version 5 standards, is there is some allowance in the current standards for some aspects of cloud technology or cloud computing. However, many organizations at the time established a compliance program simply prohibiting those because they may not have had the maturity at the time to address those type of concerns, or weren't forward-looking enough because the technology had just not come to the forefront at the time. So I believe establishing some type of technical guidance for best practices in this area, as well as the adoption of the July 2023 SAR, will be paramount to this. But as an OEM, I have a slightly different perspective on why this is necessary. And it's largely due to the shift in the types of resources that are out there. Traditionally, generation was made up of large monolithic infrastructure. So designing cybersecurity into those systems represented a really minimal cost in the initial capital investment for that resource. However, as our resource mix begins to become smaller and more distributed, that percentage expenditure on cybersecurity is obviously becoming more significant per unit. Mm-hmm. From the perspective, again, of an OEM, I'm seeing a demand in our market, which is at odds to implement lighter weight and scalable solutions, but not allowing for it due to compliance risk. So one of the only ways to accomplish a positive outcome here is, much like we're seeing a more distributed resource mix, is to also make cybersecurity or physical security solutions more distributed. Again, taking advantage of these type of remote or cloud or virtual technologies, I think is the key to do that. So, this is a call for both industry and regulation to have to account for that in order to meet our all common objectives.
Thanks, that's really helpful perspective. I have a second question, and I think Mr. Blake and Mr. Aronson, you both brought it up, maybe Mr. Mosher. So when we're thinking about IVRs and cyber, FERC just issued Order 901 on, which nobody knew it was that number, so if you don't know, don't feel bad. I just found out like the other day. But on ride-through performance requirements, right? But I don't think we thought or included in the direction to NERC any cyber aspects related to IVR. So I'm curious if you have a perspective on, I know there's IEEE efforts, there's other conversations happening. Is there a role for FERC to be playing on that front right now?
Thank you for the question, and thank you for the order. Very helpful. And back to what Jim said earlier, helping prioritize and shine a light on areas that we have underway and saying that this is somewhere to really rally the troops around and focus is incredibly powerful and helpful, so thank you. Within that order, I believe that there were some language, but I could be misremembering, but that did hint on the importance of considering those implications. That could have also been my notes writing, so I want to be careful there. But to that point, that is part of discussions that are underway as we are evaluating the new IVRs that are coming in with the new registration requirements and thresholds. And some of the things that we were looking at within that order, the natural next step is, okay, so with IVRs, what are some of the standards that make sense in the CIP space to ensure that those assets are secure? So that effort is, I think we're calling that phase 2. We're going to hit the main stuff with the modeling and that type of information first, and then move to that second.
Great.
Sure.
Okay, I have more questions, but should I keep going or? Okay. Another thing I've been thinking about is, we had conversation on the previous panel about the entry of new flexible loads or just new big loads. But I'm thinking in this context, the question would be on the flexible ones, is there any way we should be thinking about cyber standards related to whether it be data centers or, industrial facilities or you name it coming in online? Is there anything new or evolving related to the cyber risk that these new loads present?
I'll take a shot at that. I won't say that it's necessarily exclusive to cyber. I think understanding their flexibility and capabilities to address the growing demand that we're going to see, we've been talking about it sort of throughout the morning. Depending who you listen to, my general philosophy is probably 3x plus over the next decade is what we're going to need as far as demand. We've underestimated electric vehicle adoption all through its life cycle so far. I think we are only on the beginning of understanding how much AI is going to require data and data center growth. So as we look at those, and then other industrial loads and C&I and on, I think as we look at those from an availability standpoint to meet the growing demand across the economy, we need to think about making sure they're available when we need them. That does come with a cyber and reliability component to it. And I think we have to make sure that they have the flexibility that we think they do and are interconnected with the broader ecosystem. I view the energy grid of North America as a platform that is going to, I said it in my opening statement, that we're going to need all of the above. We have a resource adequacy challenge, enough fuel to meet the growing demand. We have, I've heard it, energy adequacy, energy assurance, enough infrastructure to meet that demand. And I think we need to think about some of these incoming loads as a way to bolster the reliability of the broader grid.
Thanks.
So that's an interesting question. As far as cyber standards, no one has more, desire to keep the sites up and running than the owners, right? So we want to make sure they're producing, we're making money. I will say some of the biggest risks that I'm seeing is as you're having the new influx of generators that are coming into the grid, you're having folks who are not familiar with the regulatory landscape that they now have to comply with, right? And so that is a significant risk. I do think that when you have the new IBR standards and the registrations that are going to come through that, then it's a matter of making sure all the new folks that are now going to have to register and be compliant with NERC standards period, making sure that they have the ability to implement the newest and greatest technology, particularly with those new resources, because as I mentioned earlier, there are not only just new generator owners, but also new software vendors that are supporting those new generator owners, and that could pose a significant risk.
Thank you. And my last question was on the security by design issue, which Mr. Blake and Mr. Tubb maybe somewhere when we got down the road. Are the OEMs or the engineers baking this in now? Are there barriers from a regulatory perspective or encouragement from a regulatory perspective that we should be doing? And can you talk about what those barriers look like?
Yeah, I'll hop in on that one. So Siemens Energy obviously is in a unique position, both as a supplier of critical infrastructure as well as a provider of cybersecurity solutions and services. So, internally we're dedicated to maintaining, industry best practices. We do have our ISO 27001 certification, and we do have an obligation to identify deficiencies in the products that we supply. So we maintain a product cert clearinghouse in order to inform our customers of any deficiencies or vulnerabilities in the systems we provide. There are requirements obviously existing in CIP 13 that would put an obligation on us to provide that to our customers. Beginning with the implementation of CIP 13, right, we found ourselves in a position where we were negotiating with our customers through contracts. There was not a two-way conversation, right? It's you shall comply. I'd like to recognize, again, the EISAC for their vendor affiliate program that has provided us a platform to communicate more effectively to our customers to address threats and risks. And I believe that's a critical step in ensuring secure operations of the U.S. grid. I'd also like to extend that to acknowledge FERC Order 887, which is establishing internal networks monitoring security requirements. And specifically why I want to highlight this is as a vendor and an OEM, my philosophy is that the most important aspect of qualifying a system from a security perspective is validating its operations. Philosophically speaking, in an operational technology space, a cybersecurity event, the outcome of it is no different than a misoperation, a misconfiguration, or an equipment failure. So by pushing the industry to adopt visibility into their systems, I believe it's the first step into establishing effective controls around monitoring the actual state of process and process control. I think that is going to be a key enabler for both industry and the vendors that support them. I would also like to ask the Commission to evaluate some of the work being done by the Department of Energy around cyber-informed engineering and how it may apply to this space. I think that there's activities that as an OEM we need to do before commissioning equipment and then after. And I think with the FERC Order 887 and again the work that the DOE is doing on cyber-informed engineering, that we can get there.
Thank you.
I'm going?
You go ahead. I'll go
Okay.
next.
Great. Yeah, I thought that was a tremendous answer on the importance of CIP 13 supply chain. When I was speaking about security by design in my comments, I was going from a little bit of a different angle. I thought the Commission might appreciate hearing kind of what we're seeing out in the field as these new entities are coming online, just from a kind of a broader picture of trying to make sure that their programs are in fact secure. Where we've seen great success, we've also seen certain entities have some challenge, and then also on top of that, we anticipate certain entities, especially the newer entrants coming online. And the challenge that we're speaking to is where an entity, I'll say it, the best way is that they bolt on compliance as an afterthought. Mm-hmm. So their program is really built around just their ceiling is, I'm going to be compliant. And as a result, it creates an inability to be innovative, or knowing that, I'm trying to say this clearly, but that security is the objective, not compliance. Compliance is the byproduct of achieving that. So, and that's why we use the term disassociation, but I think it sounds a little psychedelic. So I think, security by design is better, but that tends to be the theme, and what we do about it We've been incredibly proactive, reaching out to entities that are coming online. We've set up committees for our smaller outfits, which tend to be the ones that are the new entrants that are rolling on. We also do workshops in numerous forms to make sure people understand the importance of secure operations. And I think the supply chain within the standard is a wonderful example as well.
Is the interconnection, just one follow-up, Ms. Collins earlier was talking about how Southern Company requires some sort of IBR standard satisfaction as part of interconnecting. Is that soon enough to allow for that by design step instead of the bolt-on, or does it need to come earlier or differently?
Yeah, well, yeah, I think that's an important step. I think the more that we can get in front of it with education and outreach and training is essential, and I think the more that we can push that understanding out is essential. So it's a hard question to answer, but it's one of those things because some entities are coming in fully baked and ready to go. It's the challenges you have with some that are more of just trying to get connected as quickly as possible.
Thanks.
Yeah, I want to give credit to some of the suppliers. Some of the suppliers are absolutely making security a priority, and I think for them it's a competitive advantage, right? If you want to be a part of this broader grid that is so critical to national security and the health and safety of communities, you've got to be at least this tall to ride this ride, and they get that. I do think with the increasing adoption of IBRs, of more aggregators, things that were traditionally of grid-enhancing technologies, as you referred to in the previous panel, I think all of these things are changing the threat landscape, and there are absolutely well-established, sophisticated suppliers who are providing those things with security by design. I think, given the demand for growth, you're going to get fewer, or you're going to get some of those entities that are maybe less secure. And looking at security, as Mr. Blake just said, is sort of a check-the-box exercise, as opposed to truly being a part of this broader ecosystem. And so I think education is part of it. I think CIP 13 is a part of it. And I think we need to continue to prioritize it as owner-operators ourselves, as Ms. Collins said in the last panel. I'll throw one other consideration out there for you. So I recently bought a new washer-dryer, and it's internet-enabled for some reason. And that poses, I mean, think about some cycling of concentration risk in one company that has enabled this. Maybe 1 million people across the United States have it. You start cycling those things on and off because of a vulnerability in a consumer-grade device. We have a problem on a more national scale. And so these are things that I think we need to be considering, not just as owners-operators, but as we look at consumer-grade devices as well.
Okay. Thank you all. Appreciate it.
Very good. Thank you. Commissioner Danley.
So I hadn't actually planned to get into this, but Commissioner Clemence's questions made me wonder about this. So, Mr. Blake, I completely understand the idea that when you're deploying brand new IBR assets or anything that's coming online for the first time, it makes sense to have the security mechanisms integrated from the beginning and have that be part of the thinking. But this problem with what you're calling security by design, I would think that because the utility system writ large is a legacy system upon which we fall on, right? We're not designing it all from whole cloth. And on top of that, the fact that the threats are emergent at all times, that there's necessarily going to be a little bit of that bolting on in every regime, right? Am I wrong about that?
Yes, and maybe I need to clarify a bit. I'm talking about you need to establish the CIP standards as your foundation that you build upon.
I did misunderstand you then.
Yes.
Okay, gotcha.
Okay.
Thank you. So the next question I have is, so every time we're in an oversight hearing or people ask me about what more authorities does FERC need for cyber, I always express a certain amount of skepticism that we're the correct institution to be responding to what I just described as really emergent threats, right? We're a multi-member body. We're by necessity somewhat apart from the rest of the executive branch. And of course, other agencies have their role to play, and I'm not talking about that. I wonder if, and I have no quarrel with using NERC standards to set these minimum mandatory requirements. That's all well and good. But I wonder if the reluctance to be as forward-thinking as you can be when you are actually responsible for your generation assets or the like, could that be because we are insufficiently compensating? I mean, is this a tariff problem as opposed to a NERC standards problem? And I throw that question open to everybody. After 9/11, and Joe McClellan, didn't we issue an order for physical security? Yeah, okay, all right. So we have had at times in the past actions that we've taken in order to identify discrete problems and set specific regimes. And I'm not advocating this, I'm just curious, is this really a NERC standard problem, or is it a compensation one? And I'm curious if you have thoughts about this. I don't have my mind made up on it, I just want to know what people think. Don't all talk at once.
I'll speak to that again from the perspective of an OEM and what I'm seeing in the market. I agree with you. I'm not sure that this is a regulatory type issue. I do think that we are, again, as a supplier, being incentivized to meet cybersecurity objectives, right? So I have established fleet cybersecurity standards with large power generation organizations to ensure that all control systems we deliver meet a pre-configured set of those organizations' security standards. We do incorporate security by design, meeting IEC 62443 standards. And of course, the result of that is we're seeing people vote with their pocketbooks that we are an OEM or a vendor that meets their cybersecurity standards. So while you do have a minimum level of security through the CIP 13 supply chain requirements, if I can show a differentiation in the market, right, that's an advantage for my customers. And that is where we fall.
So I'll answer it this way. Compensation for investments is always important, and so is affordability for customers, and so and value for the American taxpayer. And so I do think that there are. I think you framed it exactly right. The CIP standards are a foundational level of security, and they are important. I said before, security can't be check the box. All right, I did X, Y, and Z, I'm secure. No, you're complacent, and you've telegraphed what your defenses are. So I think having that foundational level of security is incredibly important. I'll put it a different way. I use this sort of as a rhetorical device all the time. If you tell me I got to put a 10-foot fence around everything, great. The adversary brings a 12-foot ladder. So let's not pretend that we are creating this impenetrable security by investing only in cyber. I think looking at the ability to operate degraded, I think more redundancy and resiliency, I think thinking holistically about the system, not against defending against cyber attacks that, to your point, are constantly evolving. So baking it in, yeah, we can bake in some good hygiene, but eventually we're going to have to adapt to what the adversary is doing. We've got to think broader about, again, redundancy, resiliency, ability to recover, more spare equipment, and things like that.
Anyone else?
Yeah, if I
Sorry,
could
I didn't
offer.
see your card up
No,
there.
that's great. If I could offer a little bit too. I appreciate the question because it's asking the deeper question of what are the incentives? Are there incentives other than just?
I mean, knowing the fact that the liability could be potentially catastrophic, and it's difficult to actuarially determine what the likelihood is going to be, it's a hard one to determine how you want to slice it. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have an expression that certainly it is about the technology, and the thing that technology brings is new ways to do things, and cloud technology does afford a capability to make it much easier to build security in by design and standardize processes, but it's not only about the technology. It is also about the culture and about what other drivers do exist in internalizing security and building it in both technically and operationally. And it is a differentiator. As Jonathan said, I mean, we are seeing that across a lot of our partners, that security is a big differentiator. Customers are looking at it very closely. CIP 13, we applaud the efforts that has taken to help promote the sophistication of risk assessment and diving deeper into what the security requirements are necessary for the entities. And we continue, the role of NATF and others that are helping to work with industry to kind of raise that bar and look closer and demand more security, not just at a compliance level.
I guess I have one last question. When we talk about risks from supply chain, I struggle to understand how exactly it is you can assess the correct level of certainty that you want to have. I mean, because unless you were to do something like take a random sample of every one of the integrated circuits that come along and then forensically deconstruct them to see what their actual logic is, that is obviously quite an undertaking, and I'm using that as a ridiculous example. how do you think about the level of certainty that is necessary to feel, if not safe, at least, that you've done your due diligence, that you're not exposing yourself to something that is very likely there? And I realize that's open-ended, but I'm trying mostly just to get a sense of what people think of that. It seems like a daunting challenge to me.
I'll start, and thank you for the question. So first off, there is no 100% certainty that you'll ever achieve from the supply chain perspective. And I think it's where it's a combination of all the defenses that we have, standards, all the technologies that we use to protect our networks, the technologies that we use to detect what's going on our networks, is what helps to provide a more reasonable level of certainty. And I think that's where investment needs to continue to go, right? So we clearly need to continue to work with, and somebody mentioned the vendor affiliate program that we recently started at the ISAC. The whole purpose of that program was to engage the vendor community because they take security very seriously, and we can learn from them. So what are those things that we should do to sort of move these forward? But working with them to sort of understand what is in their systems to give us that level of certainty that you're referring to, and then what are the other tools that we use to help, again, protect our networks.
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think I'm going to have a part of the answer you're going to like and some you might not like so much. But before I get into that, I just want to comment. I agree 100% with Manny as far as adding to your monitoring. And then my other colleague about the 12-foot ladder. We don't talk, I think, enough about basically response and recovery, all right? Recovery because it's a real thing that if some nation state is really out for ISO New England or some other entity, it's likely that they'll get in. So back to the supply chain, there's the contractual piece that we've done with CIP 13, which is extremely helpful, and it's, again, like many of the CIP standards, it's a credible floor. And it's really helped us a lot choose vendors that have these good hygiene practices like Siemens and others. But the part that you're not going to like is that there is what you're kind of hinting at, this sort of uncertainty. There's no real standards on a software bill of materials. So if we're going from a software product, vendors with market power can kind of answer it how they choose to answer it. Some smaller vendors can answer inadequately because that's the best that they can do. So there's no standards as to when you're asking a vendor what they include in their products for an accurate assessment of your risk and liabilities for third-party libraries or whatnot. There's no consistency there. And then to the further end is, and I think you touched upon it, is I know with CIP 13 I need to ask my vendors about their practices. But how deep do I need to go? Do I need to ask my vendors and their vendors? There's not that sort of certainty in that area, even for ourselves. We know what is best practice.
So, yeah, you can't, I mean, basically what you're saying is you can't measure the problem because there is no standard yardstick and you wouldn't even know where to go applying it to measure it because you don't know how deep to go down the rabbit hole.
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so the other thing
You're right,
I'd
I
add,
don't like that answer, but it's, yeah.
it's a real answer, and it's daunting. I think it's been fighting with me all day. Doesn't want me to talk either. There are 55,000 substations in North America at the bulk electric system level. There are thousands of large generating units. There are hundreds of control centers. With that comes an element of redundancy and biodiversity. And I think I've used the phrase concentration risk before when talking about washer dryers and one company that makes these. But I think that can be true of a lot of the things that we're talking about here. So another one of my turns of phrase, I think I used it here once and it's been quoted back to me a bunch, is you protect diamonds like diamonds and you protect pencils like pencils. Mm-hmm. And the diamonds in this case are those things that must run. We absolutely need, and we can kind of run through what those are. Everything else can be redundant. We have more of it. We have the ability to not concentrate that risk in one set of manufacturers. And so if a manufacturer of a particular component is owned at the silicon level, as you mentioned, like all the way down to the chipset, first of all, that's the purview of nation states. We've got bigger problems. Second, even if that were to happen, we have more redundancy and resiliency and the ability to keep the system operational. And I think that's the way we need to be thinking about it, as opposed to trying to lock every door and protect every facility as though it was the most important thing. Understand what's must run, protect it accordingly, continue to share information and understand the vendors, have the baseline of regulations. All of that is a good holistic way to approach a really daunting issue of the broad supply chain security.
A purposeful economy of effort for those things that matter.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right, thank you, I appreciate it.
Very good. Mr. Chairman?
I'm sorry, do we have another answer? Do you mind? I'm sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. So, to echo that, Siemens Energy has customers in North America, hundreds of them, that address their CIP 13 requirements through contractual obligations, system certifications, vendor questionnaires. We are large enough an organization that we can provide SBOMs in standard formats. However, we have thousands of products, tens of thousands of sub-suppliers. We have to maintain our own supply chain risk management concepts. And we've stood up an entire organization to do that. It's an industrial cybersecurity officer concept to address those topics on a per product basis. However, I believe still one of the largest and unsolved risks is exactly what was being articulated here, which just trying to understand the scale, both in terms of exposure and then how to effectively control it, is difficult. I am encouraged to see the efforts underway by NATF, hopefully to provide practical steps to addressing this challenge. But I would like to point out, to steal the dissociation, I'm going to say deduplication, the amount of information that I'm providing to the industry that is identical, that is being used in different ways and maybe not effectively, does not allow me as a provider of services to scale effectively. And what I mean by that is I can answer the same question, provided through vendor questionnaires 100 different ways depending on the context. So, as we're going through the supply chain risk assessment, and I start funneling down through all my suppliers and sub-suppliers and then give an answer back to the industry, I'm afraid we're ending up in a situation of the telephone game.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioners. It's an interesting prospect to have to sit back and sort of watch the play develop and see all the questions you wrote down be asked. But it's helpful at the same time because I get a chance, instead of batting lead, to sort of learn from the discussion, and then do try to ask a question that adds value to the discussion. What I want to do is sort of take a step back and first acknowledge, Mr. Blake, your point about cybersecurity posture is the objective, right? It's not check the box. I agree with that. You want to have, Ms. Powell, a culture of compliance. It starts from the top, it goes all the way down, and you want to make sure that you protect against your weakest link. That's how you manage your cyber program. What I want to talk about, though, is the cybersecurity, the CIP standards that we have. And there's been a little bit of disagreement on the panel of whether or not we have the foundation that we need to protect the system as it transitions to more distributed energy resources. Some people say, I've heard, that the floor is there, the bones are there, it's how you implement it. And I've heard other people say, well, we need to change the system, it's not right, high, medium, low, this isn't the appropriate structure to move forward for this new era. And I'm in particular concerned about coordinated attacks in particular. Are there any gaps in our current standards to protect us from coordinated attacks? So I know that's a big question. I want to throw that out there, and I'd love to hear any reaction or responses that you have. Ms. Powell?
Sure. I would echo that the bones are good, but I don't think many would argue in my industry that if all you're doing is meeting the CIP standards, to my colleague's point, is you're not doing enough. You're probably failing if that's all you're doing. I think what we had mentioned earlier as far as adapting faster, without being a broken record. You know, as Maggie was saying, is that there are good people on these standard committees, and they are doing good work. And you know, certainly the highlighted VMware change to it, I don't think anybody is more frustrated than the people on those committees for not getting that forward. But we have to either adapt that process or have a separate group looking out sooner to newer technologies, disruptive technologies. You know, if, for say, we had a group that was, you know, more on the cutting edge and looking at it before people adapt, you know, on a whole scale cloud technologies, you know, not even on the cutting edge. You know, if somebody was doing this 5 years ago when it was pervasive in other industries, we'd be in a better place now. So, you know, something with the process has to change, but I would echo that the bones are good.
Mr. Blake.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for the question. So I think the first thing I always think of when I hear the gap question, because that's one of the ones I'm always asking internally, because, you know, you have some sleepless nights, is to always remember that the standards are set up as a defense in depth type approach, right? So there may be a weaker part over here, but it's being covered in other areas. But to the point, we need to keep up, right? So I don't think anyone disagrees with the need to increase the pace of addressing certain of these issues through the standards process. Jim mentioned earlier about a thing I think I'm not allowed to talk about to OGC, right? So that effort has been taken by NERC. Then also, I think even at the NERC board level, they've restructured to put more focus and emphasis on the standards process by the way that they've done their committees, realigned one specific committee to do just that. And the only other thing I would add, you know, when it comes to, I understand the cloud emerging, the technologies there. Yeah, I do. I think there's an immense amount of benefit in looking that direction. The thing I think that you see that I do value greatly about the standards process is that it is a deliberative process. Again, setting aside the pace, but it is important that it's a deliberative process because you're talking about our nation's backbone. And these are complicated decisions where you're moving something, in layman's terms, off-prem, right? And you're creating more reliance on someone else achieving objectives. And that doesn't mean it's a bad idea. It could mean it's a great idea. But we need to understand when we do all of these things, have we deeply thought about all of the potential unintended consequences? And that's what I think the standards process does so well, is because the education, the evaluation, and discussion to come up to a solution in that space. So,
Thank you. Thank you. Ms. Murphy.
Mr. Chairman, that is a very good question. I appreciate it. And I agree, you know, I mean, I was, you know, Mr. Robb, his comments from earlier today, I was very comforted and pleased to hear his comments. I think, you know, we can't ignore the fact that the NERC reliability standards have propelled the industry much further in making sure the grid is secure. The issue, and I think, you know, as Mr. Powell said, the bones I feel like are good. It's sometimes when you look at specific, so if we have a new technology that exists within the existing box of the reliability standards, it's fantastic. We don't have any problem. We can implement it today. The issue is if there is a gray area of does this new technology fall within the defined box that we have set ourselves in, many companies will choose not to act for risk and fear of being deemed non-compliant with the reliability standards. And so they choose not to act, but to leverage some older and decaying technologies that will be obsolete soon when other companies don't. So that's kind of those are my thoughts. I think we can make a lot of improvements. How can we be more nimble and agile to make sure there is a path forward so more of the conservative companies can adopt this newer technology?
I'm turning to Ms. Powell. I want to add a little twist to the question for you. I mean, we talked a lot about cloud computing here today, and this is something I've been talking about. I spoke at a Cloud for Computing conference like 10 years ago. What would you say to regulators like me, and especially my state colleagues, who have some concern about cloud computing, that they're nervous about, they don't understand it. They think that it may add more risk, not address the risk to their systems. What do you say to them?
Yeah, this is a big part of my job, is actually out there educating folks about what cloud technology is really all about, and how it really works, and how it's different than on-prem. Because without a doubt, I mean, that what is known very well is how your on-prem systems operate, how they're secured. I see them, I can hug them. You know, they're there. There's that understanding. So it is a process, and we have seen a dramatic uptick in the level of sophistication in the questions. There's definitely learning going on, and I think it's done in the context of these very questions that have been raised today, of like, you know, industry has these challenges, both operationally and security. What is the universe out there that we can use to help address these? So we're now getting down to conversations that really look at what are those risks that you're trying to address? How can cloud help address those risks? And actually, Jonathan mentioned earlier, the traditional approach has been very much a monolithic approach. And so that's part of the conversation too. It does get complex, because when you start looking at all the elements of IT-OT convergence, OT systems look a lot more like IT systems than they ever have before in the past. So trying to understand what that looks like, what the implications of that are, who are the stakeholders that really need to weigh in on that. All OT systems are not alike. They vary by what the functions are that they perform, and they vary by their operational requirements. Cloud technologies are not all the same. You know, we talk a lot about a regional data center as kind of our default understanding, that it's somebody else owns your data center. But when you really dive into what is the difference between a cloud data center versus an on-prem data center, the differences are notable. At a cloud data center, there is no identification of where certain data resides on which server. The data is anonymized and ephemeral, and offers a great deal of layers of protection. No personnel that works in a cloud data center, at least at AWS, can see or use any of the data that resides within that data center. Likewise, just the resiliency. You know, when you take a traditional on-prem setup, traditionally there's a primary data center and a backup data center. The resiliency that the infrastructure available through cloud offers the capability to have things running in multiple data centers that are very geographically dispersed, so that if there is a failure of a server or even of a data center, customers won't see any change because the failover is so seamless. So anyway, that's probably a long-winded answer, but it really is that the opportunity to dive in and to educate. And we have, we have spoken at NARUC. We have tried to be available. We've done training with NERC. We have great allies at NERC in trying to climb that learning curve and continue to evolve that base of knowledge. And once there is that base of knowledge, I do think that will inform how regulatory language and the requirement language is developed. And I do think that there are some advantages to the way that NERC is structured, in that it does get the input from those that are in the field. It goes, it's a unique situation, but those that actually are responsible for performing and managing those systems are in the room defining what that language should be.
So I saw a lot of head nodding when you were talking. Anyone have a different opinion? Should we be more concerned about cloud computing than traditional computing resources being used at the utility level? Okay, all right. Mr. Aronson, you said something in your opening remarks that caught my attention. You talked about CEII, Critical Energy Infrastructure Information. Can you talk a little bit more? You got cut off.
He's doing his job. He did great.
Can you talk a little bit more about what changes you think might be necessary to how we handle this critical information.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Look, the fact that there is a designation of critical electric infrastructure information is incredibly helpful, and there's others. There's PCII, and there's defense critical information and defense critical electric infrastructure. So all of this, there's at least sort of a naming convention out there and an understanding that some of this information, the way I've thought about it, just to make it real simple terms, there's some information that we'll always share. Okay, people need to know this in order to be able to design systems or regulate or what have you, great. There is some information that we will never share because it is so sensitive that it has real impact on grid operations and would really give the adversary an advantage in trying to create an attack against some of this most critical infrastructure. And then there's other information that we'll share on occasion. With the right controls. And certain state commissions have done a great job with having reading rooms. They have sunshine laws. They've got all sorts of protections. And so come in, we'll tell you everything you need to know so that you can make informed decisions as regulators, and then we'll take our information and go home, and it's not subject to those sorts of investigations or disclosures. With respect to Form 715 specifically here at FERC, I think one of the challenges is anybody who asks for information and signs a disclosure and says, I won't share this with anybody else, effectively gets it. And that, to me, seems like a really flip way to be treating some of the most critical information that we have as operators and that you all take on as regulators. And so I think there's a way to address that achieves your goals of getting the information that you need and that allows people from the outside who do have a need to know in order to design better mousetraps to help us operate the grid can have access to that information too, but just not everybody who, and we know our adversaries are leveraging America's openness, and we need to be cognizant of that.
You raise an excellent point, and I know I certainly, and I know the commission, we don't ever want to be the point of failure when you talk about protecting information. So I'd like to have a follow-up conversation with you to learn more about what we can do to protect that information.
Appreciate it.
Look, you guys are the best in the business when it comes to talking about these issues. You've covered so much ground. I could ask questions for the sake of asking questions, but I won't. I'll just thank you for appearing. I thank you for your candid answers, and I look forward to working with all of you as well going forward. That's what I have, David.
All right, thank you so much, Chairman. Thank you, Commissioners, for the questions and answers. We have a few minutes left before the end of the panel. In that vein, I'd like to turn to Joe McClellan, the Director of the Office of Energy Infrastructure Security, to ask a question or two if we have time.
Yeah, thank you, David. Actually, I have three, but we'll probably just have time for one. So I'll direct this question at Manny, but I'll say anyone that wants to jump in, please feel free to do so. So considering emerging threats, so we have current threats, we have emerging threats under the categories of supply chain, insider threat, malware. But what about the new threats like artificial intelligence and quantum computing? What should we be doing? What can we do together? And I think those topics represent an excellent examples of where government and industry should probably be closely coordinating on these topics. So what can we do? What should we be doing at this time in anticipation of those threats fully materializing?
Thanks for the question, Joe. And I don't think it's very different than the conversations that we've had about virtualization and cloud. We've got to get ahead of it, right? These technologies, these emerging technologies provide tremendous benefits, but with any new technology, there's risks. So we need to assess the risks as it relates to not only the legacy grid, but the new grid as well, too. AI in particular, when we think about the opportunities from AI in the security context, how it could help us identify threats more quickly, I think could be a game changer, right? We also have to think about misinformation that could be spread by AI. But, suffice to say, I think learning from what we've done with virtualization and cloud and trying to get ahead of this so we can enable and facilitate the adoption of these technologies in a positive way is the opportunity that's in front of us.
I'll jump in on this. So with AI and quantum and machine learning, we're seeing a lot of new and interesting risks to, with the ability to, mis and disinformation, the ability to mimic people. You were getting what were, sophisticated phishing attacks. These are sophisticated phishing attacks on steroids. So I think Manny said something incredibly important. This is absolutely where industry and government need to be working collaboratively. One of the things we've been talking about grid growth because of, just keeps turning off on me. It's sick of my voice too. because of AI, we have great growth. Like, that's terrific. It is to America's national security interests and America's competitive advantage that we enable AI in an effective and a sort of thoughtful way here. We have to grow out that infrastructure. We have to support it with electricity and infrastructure to support it. But that is going to be part of how we continue to defend ourselves as a nation. And the last thing I'll say is with respect to quantum, when we get to kind of quantum at scale, which, depending who you listen to, is a few years or a few decades away, but somewhere in between, we do need to understand that that is going to completely obviate our traditional security regimes. And so this goes back to, you cannot protect everything from everything all of the time. We have to think about the ability to operate degraded. We have to think about the ability to operate without digital overlay in some cases. And that's something I don't want to lose that capability of.
Any other comments on that? Just to your last point, Scott, I will say that quantum computing is already changing the way we do business today for encryption. So there are new encryption standards. The old transmissions that were encrypted, that were under the old standard, those are vulnerable. And so it's never too early to start on these types of threats. Recognizing the time, I'll yield back, David, because I saw the yellow card and perhaps the red was starting to flash. Thank you.
This isn't a congressional hearing, but we have reached the end of our time for this panel. So I do want to thank all the panelists for joining us today. It's been a really interesting discussion, both in this panel regarding cybersecurity and the prior panel regarding the changing resource mix. We will now take a 45-minute break for lunch. And those of you who are watching online, please remember to subscribe and like to our FERC YouTube channel. We'll resume at 1:15.
Where are you headed, Manny? Nice job.